In this video, we're going beyond Scripture and into early church history, examining what the earliest Christians had to say or didn't say about Mary. If you haven't already, smash that like button below and subscribe to the channel to help grow the ministry and to fulfill the Great Commission by spreading the gospel to the ends of the earth. In part 1, we unpacked everything the New Testament has to say about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and it's beyond clear that the text and context do not align with any so-called Mariology teaching that the Roman Catholic Church holds to, or with the Orthodox views either. Both groups share most of the Marian doctrines with a couple of variations. The Roman Catholic Church has made the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Mary official dogmas under ex cathedra, with even declaring that a person is condemned if they reject these teachings. According to these doctrines is that people should basically stop holding up John 3:16 signs in the middle of the crowd at sporting events. So, since neither can appeal to the New Testament, is that they refer and defer to what the early church fathers had to say. But, what did these guys actually have to say or didn't say about Mary? In parts 2 through 4, we have seen no references to Mary from the Didache, 1 Clement or Papias, and Ignatius's 3 statements were just simply stating her name as the mother of Jesus. Polycarp is part of our earliest 2nd century group, and collectively, Papias, Ignatius, and him are seen connected with the Apostle John, per the testimony of Irenaeus, along with Ignatius's letter to Polycarp, and Polycarp referring to Ignatius and his 7 letters in his letter to the Philippians. Eusebius summarizes these 3 together, saying that they held office during the same time frame. Polycarp was the disciple of the apostles, Papias was the bishop of Hierapolis, and Ignatius was the bishop of Antioch. Today in part 5, we're going to be covering Polycarp of Smyrna. Polycarp has only one survived work, his letter to the Philippians, and most likely he wrote other things, but there's none left that we can look through. He was a disciple of the Apostle John. Irenaeus, in Book 3, describes him having been instructed by apostles, appointed bishop of Smyrna, and suffered a martyr's death. The closest extant work of Irenaeus saying Polycarp was a disciple of John is here in Book 5. It's not explicit, though, from Irenaeus, whereas it is in Eusebius's church history, citing Irenaeus's letter to Florinus, which we don't have, though, but the quote begins by saying that Irenaeus met Polycarp when he was a boy, and recalls how Polycarp spoke of his intercourse with the Apostle John and others who knew Jesus firsthand. The last statement on his relationship with John comes in a different chapter of Eusebius, and within there describes how Polycarp followed the instructions of John. From this, and likely other oral traditions, is that Jerome said that Polycarp was a disciple of John's and was ordained bishop by him for the church at Smyrna. If that was the case, then Polycarp would have been in charge when John wrote Revelation and received the original letter from Jesus to the church in Smyrna, as it was the second of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. Irenaeus describes Polycarp's letter to the Philippians, which only adds to the authenticity of the work. Polycarp's death is described in another work called The Martyrdom of Polycarp, which the church in Smyrna wrote. It's from this work where we get Polycarp's timeline from. Here it says that he served Christ for 86 years in 9-3, and then in 21-1, it dates his death to either February 22nd, 155 AD, or February 23rd, 156 AD. So, The simple math here is just to subtract 86 off, and you get a 69 roughly date, AD date, which could either be talking about his birth or the beginning of his faith. The faith date seems to be more of what's being implied here in the statement. One thing to note about what is being said here is that this is an eyewitness work, is that some believers from Smyrna said that the Romans tried to burn Polycarp alive, but he was miraculously saved as the flame did not consume him. This is kind of similar to the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel 3, and that a Roman executioner was ordered to stab him with a spear, and his blood flowed out in such a quantity that it extinguished all the flames that were surrounding him. This is a similar story to the one that says that the Romans tried to boil the Apostle John in oil, but he was miraculously preserved by God. Both are possible. A person simply cannot completely discredit these stories while at the same time saying that they fully believe in all the miracles in both the Old and New Testaments. As for the dating of the letter to the Philippians, is that scholars give it a range of either from 110 to 140 AD. The reasoning for that is that this would put the early end at 110 because Polycarp refers to Ignatius's 7 letters, which gives a sense of recency here, and those are dated to roughly 107 AD, as Jerome says that Ignatius was martyred in the 11th year of Emperor Trajan, which dates to 108-109 AD. So 110 is typically the earliest date that's attributed to this work, while there are some that argue for a later date around 140 AD, which is typically the camp that is always trying to date everything late, including Ignatius's letters, and by dating then Polycarp's letter date later too, is then you create a bigger window to date the New Testament books later as well. I'll say this every single time that I come across such an issue, is that when we're talking about authorship dating, is that this all of it, always deals with Jesus' prediction of the 70 AD temple destruction. If the New Testament was written before 70 AD, then it logically and evidentially means that Jesus supernaturally predicted the temple destruction 40 years in advance. It's that simple, and it is what lies at the core of critics trying to slap later authorship dates on any Christian work from the 1st and 2nd centuries. Overall, the Polycarp's letter is a little bit bigger than 2 Thessalonians 3 chapters, and it's a pretty simple read once you get into it. The 14 chapters are basically 1 to 3 verses each, that is primarily concerned over Christians behaving and reflecting Christ properly at all times. While reading it, it really does sound like another kind of Pauline work, very influenced by Paul. When you get in there, and there's good reason for that, as Paul is brought up 4 times throughout the letter, and a clear-cut statement here that says that Paul wrote the letter of Philippians to them. Philippians is, just shockingly, is considered authentic by critics. Paul is next mentioned in 9:1 with 3 others, including Ignatius. For knowledge's sake, is that Paul is the only apostle named in the letter, and these 5 other guys are the only other males named in there as well. In 11:3, Polycarp references 1 Corinthians 6:2, giving Paul credit for that letter, and broadly describes all of Paul's letters to the churches. And to add insult to injury to critics, is that Polycarp cites the verse, "Be you angry and sin not, and let not the sun set on your wrath." And he calls this scripture and sacred writing. That verse is a direct quote of Ephesians 4:26, which critics have put in the disputed box. Polycarp even uses Ephesians 2:8-9 for his declaration that we are saved by grace and not by works. These are clear demonstrations that critics and all their late dating pseudonymous narratives are just making it up. It's only done because of Jesus' prediction of the temple and the high Christology that is contained in the so-called disputed works of Paul. They cannot and will not ever accept an early eyewitness authorship date with any of the New Testament, even though out of all the 27 books, that's all they talk about is an eyewitness testimony. So, when Polycarp is citing Paul and calling his Ephesians letter scripture, and then follows this statement up calling Jesus the eternal Son of God and also Lord and God, is that this shows Polycarp's Christology is directly coming from the apostles' Christology found in the New Testament. Polycarp's letter is jam-packed with New Testament references. I could basically overload you for 2 hours just showing you, one on one side and the New Testament verse on the other side. But I want to show you examples of Polycarp citing New Testament books, which critics always try to late date after the temple destruction. Here's Acts 2:24 in 1:2. Acts has to be after 70 AD because if it's not, then Luke can't be after 70 AD. And that's Jesus' prediction in there as well. Then in 1:3, you have 1 Peter 1:8 used in conjunction with Ephesians 2:8 and 9. In 2:3, you have Polycarp using Matthew and Luke together, recalling Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. 3:2, you have 2 Peter 3:15 used when bringing up Paul. Then 4:1 shows 1 Timothy 6, 7, and 10 used, and the pastoral epistles are thrown in the disputed or even not even close to authentic category according to critics. 5:2 talks about the two-age concept, and the reigning with him language comes directly from 2 Timothy 2:11. 7:1, we have 1 John 4:3 cited, which also mirrors 2 John 1:7's, but we know that John's letters and Gospel and Revelation comes later in the 90s. Immediately after, in 7:2, he uses Mark 14:38 and Matthew 26:41 about the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. 11:4 comes shortly after describing Paul's letters, and used 2 Thessalonians 3:15 there. So, at the end of the day, Polycarp referenced 19 of the 27 books in a letter that is just a little bit bigger than 2 Thessalonians 3 short chapters. And being someone who received a first edition of the book of Revelation, you know that Polycarp has read all 27 books contained in the New Testament multiple times over at this point in his life, which takes us to the main topic at hand. How many references to Mary do we find in this epistle? None. That's right. He didn't bring her up once. And this is a disciple of the Apostle John. Polycarp got to read all of John's works, which include the two woman passages that, I'm sorry, Roman Catholics, you're making a lot of the one at Cana and at 1925, taking a little verse and making a huge mountain out of it. And also every other book of the New Testament, which includes the birth narratives. Yet he doesn't bring her up and tries to exalt her any higher. And it wasn't like he was not bringing up women in this letter either. He told them to walk in faith, love, purity, and how to treat their husbands and raise their children. Every single one of those things are things that I see posted all the time about how Mary is, the purest person ever. Obviously she's immaculate, that she never sinned. Then why are we saying, hey, follow her, act like her? Not a bad time to bring her up if she's supposed to be venerated, but he didn't. He told the Philippian church that the widows are to be sober-minded, making intercession, and abstaining from sinful behaviors. At this point in time, the very least that we can say about Mary is she is not on the earth. Okay, it's long past either she A, died like a regular person, or B, possibly according to Roman Catholics and Orthodox, that she was assumed into heaven. So, if she really was assumed into heaven, sinless all her life, and became an intercessor for prayers, why is Polycarp not bringing her up in any capacity for any of those roles? He would have easily known if she was assumed bodily into heaven from either seeing it herself or seeing it himself, or word of mouth of eyewitnesses, or from John himself too. But all we have here is dead silence. And whether people are getting tired of, well, this is just argument from silence. Well, it's like, well, yeah, but that's kind of the point. Nobody's talking about her in any of those things in the earliest decades following her supposed either death or assumption into heaven. Those are kind of big events. And the last verse in the letter, he mentions a sister of Crescens that's heading their way and that they should commend her on her arrival. So, once again, you have no references to Mary from a first generation Christian who had read the entire New Testament, with even being taught by John, and yet there's not a single allusion that one could find to support any of these doctrines for Mary. But actually, there's a verse in Polycarp's letter that stands in direct opposition to one of these doctrines. And that's the doctrine of her being called the Mother of the Church. In chapter 3, verse 2, we saw the clear-cut statement from Polycarp that Paul wrote the letter of Philippians to them. Polycarp was turning their attention to Scripture, and now follows that up by saying the following in the last part of verse 2 and the beginning of 3:3. Into the which, if you look diligently, you shall be able to be built up unto the faith given to you, which is the mother of us all.
Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.